back on the PowerPoint screen, and then you can start your presentation. You're ready to roll.
Thank you for coming. Thank you. All right, thank you for that. Okay, so my name is Tiffany Hippie. I'm an adjunct professor of Spanish at Boise State, and I'm going to present on a project I've been working on for the last 2 semesters with students called Yoga en Español. This is the general outline of what I'll be talking about today. At the very beginning, we're going to do a little mini chair Yoga en Español session just to give you a taste of what the students experience. We'll talk about the real-life application idea behind the project, a little bit of the background about how I came to the idea of the project, my goals for the project, the way I've broken it up for students and participation, some of the obstacles I've come across, and what I hope to achieve moving forward. So, vamos a practicar in our chairs. Okay. But you'll need a little space if you'd like to just slide your chairs on over away from the table. All of the students ahead of time are provided a list of vocabulary, and so here I have just a very short list for you guys as well as a point of reference. So, siéntate y pon las manos en las rodillas. Estamos bien sentados, la coronilla hacia arriba. Inhalamos por la nariz y exhalamos por la nariz. Inhala y exhala. Inhala y exhala. Vamos a conectar movimiento. Inhalamos los brazos arriba, exhalamos abajo. Inhalamos los brazos arriba, exhalamos abajo. Conectamos la inhalación y la exhalación con los brazos arriba y los brazos abajo. Inhalamos muy arriba, arriba, arriba. Y exhalamos, bajamos una mano y vamos a la derecha. Inhalamos al centro, exhalamos a la izquierda. Una vez más, inhalamos y exhalamos. Inhalamos al centro, exhalamos a la izquierda. Inhalamos al centro, exhalamos, bajamos las manos al pecho, bajamos la barbilla al pecho y namaste. This is a very small taste of what the students experience when they come to the yoga class. Very nice, yes. So the very basic thesis, if you will, of this project is to create a complete immersion simulation for the students. So they're still on campus when they're participating in the yoga class, but they're outside of their normal academic setting, and they get a small taste of what it would actually be like to survive in Spanish. The background behind the project kind of came from me looking for ways to help bridge the gap between what we have to offer our students and what we don't have to offer the students. I typically teach lower division, so I work with 101, 102 students, some 200 level as well. But what is being offered right now as far as internships and a chance for students to actually be immersed in their community is offered at upper division when students have already acquired a higher level of communication skills, but the students at that 100, 200 level aren't quite at the level they need to be sent out into the community to help and create not a burden on the companies and places we partner with. So I was trying to think, what could I do to help the lower level students get to that own level in their communication skills, as well as to help them build that confidence to want to continue on, and also trying to find a way to bring those different levels together. If we could find students from a higher level, working with students from a lower level, and creating almost a mentorship and a relationship between the 2 students, that would be great. And I love yoga. I teach yoga out in the community. I've been practicing yoga myself for many, many years. And I started finding when I was doing in-class projects with students that a lot of them are interested in yoga. It's become a big fad lately. And so I thought that would be a really great way to play on what students are already interested in and kind of begin, like I said, bridging those gaps between what we have to offer and what else we could be offering the students. It also implements total physical response. So the students are looking at what I'm doing as I'm speaking to them, and they're responding with their own bodies in the same way. My goals for the project are to provide a space for all levels to come together. So this class is open from a 101 student through professors, and it helps to build confidence in the students. They come in, many of them having never experienced an immersion situation before, and they leave finding that it's something that they can actually survive and thrive in. It also helps them to develop more of their paralinguistic skills, so beginning to rely less on understanding what's actually being said and more on picking up on those external cues, body language, especially in the yoga class. Students begin to understand how to receive that information as well as how to produce that information. And it helps prepare them to advance to higher levels or to more opportunities in their own community. And my biggest goal for it is to provide a tiny bit of a study abroad simulation, because for students to truly become fluent in a language, the easiest and most effective way is for them to really fully be immersed. And if I can provide that little taste of what that's like for them in a safe space, a lot of them begin to feel more confident in actually taking charge of their own ability to study abroad. The project is set up into different sections. So first I had to figure out how to get the project set up, then the vocabulary, the way the class works, music, there's a reflection part, both oral and written, and I have some results or feedback from students to share with you as well. To set up the project, I first had to find a way to get students involved, and the easiest way to be able to receive the space on campus for us to do this was to partner up with a club. I partnered up with the Spanish club because my project is offered in Spanish, and then reaching out to other professors, some of whom began offering it as one of the options for a cultural project for students, and it took place of a project where they had to be immersed in some sort of a cultural event in the community. Some professors were willing to offer it as extra credit. It created a way for students to begin to connect via social media. And then the students who chose it either as a cultural project or as extra credit were allowed to receive credit for that one time, but many students returned a second or a third time throughout the semester because they found that they really enjoyed doing something that they liked in a new skill, their new language that they had been working on, and finding that each time they came back, it felt a little bit easier on them. So the first semester I offered this, I only offered it one time, and there was a really good turnout. There were about 25 students who came the first semester when I offered it. And so the second semester, we offered it once a month this past semester. And I believe we had over 100 students came between the 4 different sessions, which is incredible to have a turnout that high of an activity that's not a requirement for your class. And then at the end, the students have a chance where they're sent home to reflect on their experience, on what they learned, on how they grew from the experience as well. And I provide a list of guided questions that I'll show you here in just a moment. This is a picture from one of the events we had this semester. This is after the class when they were told to pick their favorite pose from the class and hold it for a picture. So there's lots of very smiley, happy Spanish-speaking faces in this picture. The event description that I posted was a way to start kind of easing students into what this was going to be like. I started off with a very small section in Spanish, relying really heavily on cognates or words that are very similar in Spanish and English. And then I provided the translation to that same section as well as more information for the students. And this was shared via Facebook event page for students, like I said, to begin to connect, to see it, for their friends to see it if they sign up for the class as well, and just really trying to show them from the beginning that the class aims to be accessible to all levels of Spanish as well as yoga. The vocabulary list that I provided the students with it's a little bit longer than the one I provided you guys with, but again, I really focused on picking the words that were very similar in Spanish and English. And this was provided to the students ahead of time. It was emailed out to them along with the link to the event description for them to have to be able to study. The first session that I did last semester, I provided printouts for them as well at the actual class, but I found that they really didn't use them. The students really liked relying less and less on the paper and began to rely more and more on watching what I was doing, watching what their neighbors were doing, and beginning to acquire the language in that way. But I focused on basic body parts and as well as a few actual pose names that we were going to be going through, different sides and movements. And then I, in some of the cases, had to translate it not just from Spanish to English, but changing the register from yoga English to regular English as well for the students to have. And the list of vocabulary that they were provided with was based exclusively off of the class that I had designed for the students. The way the yoga class was set up had to change a little bit. On the left side here, I have the way that a regular yoga class would be planned or prepared. And over here, the way I did it for the Spanish class. And if you go directly across, it lines up with what the students would need. So typically in a yoga class, you're going to begin with a slow guided meditation, a lot of speaking where the students aren't looking at you and they're focusing their attention inward. And then you begin a slow-paced warm-up. We move through the more active flow, cooling down again where the speech begins to slow down, bringing them to their shavasana, their final resting pose, and then providing them a moment of reflection. So it begins with a lot of talking and moves down to less and less talking. When I started planning how I was going to do it for a language-based objective as opposed to a physical or spiritual-based objective, the first thing I start with when the students come in is naming objects. So we make sure that they know how to say mat, how to say block, some of the parts of the body, which side is which, before we even begin the class. And then I have students begin in the seated position so they can still see me. So they feel comfortable, their eyes can be opened or closed depending on what level they're at. They're provided that option. And I begin with a very slow speech. Through the warm-up, starting to speak a little bit more and a little bit more. And then when we move into the active flow, I'm modeling it, I'm doing the class with them and picking those cognates, really relying heavily on words that sound very similar to what they're used to hearing in English and finding ways to say them very similarly in Spanish, and a lot of repetition. So each flow that we do twice. So the students the first time are paying a lot more attention to the visual cues. They're watching me, watching their neighbors, and then when we move through it a second time, whether it be just from right side to left side or we do both sides twice, the students begin to look less outward and they're focusing more inward, and they're hearing the language and acquiring it still through their peripheral, but it's no longer their main focus because they're familiar with the language. When the cool down comes, I begin to speak a little bit faster because they've now been listening to me speak Spanish for about 40 minutes. And their brains are warmed up, they're understanding it better, they're used to my way of speaking, they're used to the vocabulary. So instead of slowing my speech down, this is where I start to throw in more vocabulary, more of the grammar. So the students who are at the more advanced levels are going to be challenged a little bit more. And the students who are at the lower levels are going to start recognizing a lot of words, even if they're missing the entire idea of what I'm saying. They do still get put in their shavasana. They're all lying down at the end with their eyes closed, and then I guide them out. But at this point, when I guide them out, they've already learned the word for hands, they know feet, they know moving, they know circles, they know how to stretch, and so I can move them out in the same exact way that I do in my classes in English for students who are working on acquiring the second language skills in Spanish. And they receive a time at the end where their eyes are closed, and I guide them out with a small meditation as well. So it just kind of almost flips the linguistic cues that are applied from English when I move the class into Spanish, just working on building that foundation up. Then during the whole class, I also am playing music in the background in Spanish, and this is just another way to pick up on that peripheral learning. So the students are still being exposed to the language without it being their direct focus. The idea being, like in any classroom, if your students' attention begins to wander and they're looking at the walls, they have posters and they're still acquiring that language, if at any point in time the student begins to feel like physically the class is too much and they need to take a break, or they're done listening to me for a little bit, they really can't escape Spanish. Even if they stop participating, they're still acquiring something or some level of exposure to the language. At the very end of the class, while we're still in the gym, I have a little bit of an oral reflection with the students, and it's just very basic questions on what they thought. Was it easy? Was it difficult? Which was more difficult, the yoga or the Spanish? Was it easier or harder than they thought? And you typically can tell ahead of time when they walk in based off of how much Spanish they're speaking to you when they come into the room, or recognizing students from previous classes. I begin asking students who are in a higher level, moving down to the students who are in the lower level. So again, the lower level students have a chance to repeat what they've already heard. They have a chance to acquire the language from their peers at a higher level. And then the students are provided with a guided written reflection as well. These are the 5 questions that I have them focus on, asking them, how did they feel attending an event led in Spanish? What was most difficult? How did you understand what you needed to do without understanding what was said? How might this be useful in the language acquisition process? And then, did you feel frustrated or lost at times? Do you think this is something people often feel when they're unable to fully understand the language? So with my questions here, I'm really guiding them back to my original goals at whatever level they're already at in their own acquisition process. And these are some of the feedback excerpts that I've received from students. Students saying that they had a pleasant experience, they would do it again. They would wholeheartedly recommend it to anybody hoping to open their Spanish heart chakra, which is a very cute little yoga tie-in. I had a couple of my students have put this exact quote in their reflection, saying they feel more confident about studying abroad now. Just in general, they going into it didn't feel like they were going to do well. They were at a 100 level, and the idea of moving out of the classroom and into something more community-based seemed very scary. This one here, once I got to the class, I was a little nervous on if I would even understand what we were being asked to do, but it went really well. I understood what we needed to do by listening to keywords in each sentence that would give me a better idea of what to do. I mostly listened for words like izquierda, derecho, brazo, pie. I tried to listen for body part words and directional words that I recognized, and it made it a lot easier for me to understand what to do. So it was exciting for me to see that students were picking up on what I had set out as their goals or their can-do statements without them even knowing what the goal was. They just showed up hoping to get extra credit or hoping to hang out and have a good time with their friends. And here I have a student saying that she's practiced yoga before and having past experience with some yoga poses provided background for me. Using familiar events or activities to better understand language is a tool I think of as helpful and effective. While I didn't necessarily feel frustrated or lost, there were certainly times where I could tell I wasn't picking up on the full context of what was said and instead relied on generals. I definitely think this is something people experience often and is something to be mindful of. And then this one from one of my students saying that they like the Spanish, especially because I was their instructor. And so they're used to hearing me speak the same way every day in the classroom, and students begin to acquire your language as their second language. But then when they come into the yoga room, I don't use professor speak, I use yoga speak. And so she's saying I did not know what she was going to say, and she was using different words that I'm not used to hearing. It was good for me to hear that and to practice my listening skills. So even though I'm still the person who exposes her most to the language, she came to an event that exposed her to the language in a different way. And here I had to use context clues or her modeling to try and decipher what she was saying. And if she was repeating words, I would eventually understand what that word meant and not have to think about it as much as other words that I did not know. So again, using that repetition, allowing students that chance to begin to receive and acquire more vocabulary and reuse it before I move on from it. Obstacles that I came across were being able to find a consistent schedule to offer it to students. I received many emails from students asking when else it was going to be offered or if there were problems with scheduling and last minute changes. Students who wanted to go who are no longer able to go, flexibility with schedule, mainly being my own schedule. I was teaching Tuesdays and Thursdays last semester, so I aimed to fit it around my own schedule, but then students who take classes on the opposite blocks during the week maybe didn't have a chance to come and experience the event like they wanted to. The biggest obstacle I found in my own group of students' reflection is getting students to reflect on the language acquisition and not on the physical exertion that they went through during the yoga class. But again, kind of that you lead the horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I provide them with these questions, which from my point of view, I thought seemed very language centered, but were just ambiguous enough to make me receive a lot of feedback about how difficult yoga was. But they all compared it, saying that Spanish felt easier. So even though it's definitely something I can go back on and fix and work on, expanding from my end, at least the students left it feeling like Spanish was easier than what they had to actually do. And community involvement is something that I'd really like to be able to bring together with this, but because of the fact that it's being offered on campus in the Boise State Rec Center, for someone who's not a student or not a member of the gym to come, they have to be a guest of a student and they have to pay. But I would really like to find a space in the community to be able to offer the class for free to community members who are native Spanish speakers, as well as to the students together, because I have another yoga class in Spanish in the community for community members, and I'd like to be able to bring those two together, but finding a space that works for both is proving to be difficult at the moment. So those are things that I'm working on improving. Moving forward, I would really like students to be able to create more connections, to have a space after the session, to be able to hang out, to talk, to get to know each other a little bit more, instead of us only being allowed to stay during the block that fits into the rec center schedule. The frequency, I would like to be able to continue to offer it once a month to students, but that depends a lot on whether or not we stay at the rec center, if I'm able to find somewhere else to offer with community involvement, and community involvement being my biggest goal moving forward. Gracias. Namaste. And any questions? Yeah.
Like, how long is usually a yoga session, your yoga session for Spanish?
For Spanish, it's 45 minutes or an hour, depending on the rec's availability. I like the class to be an hour long because it provides more time for those repeated movements and allows each of those active flows to be done twice. And when it gets cut down to 45 minutes, sometimes that's when I have to rely on, we did on the right side, now you are just repeating it on the left side.
And then the music, I mean, I'm not a yogi, so I'm assuming it's a little bit slower than a Zumba. So
Yes.
what kind of artists? Because, you know, like how I've tried faster songs in the classroom, like Despacito, and they love it, but they don't acquire any vocabulary.
Right.
So with the slower songs, you know, like what kind of songs have you picked? Can you give an
I
example?
pick songs exactly like that. They're slower. They follow that same just kind of peaceful melody. They'll pick up when we pick up. They slow down when we slow down, because when we're moving faster, I'm not as worried about them paying attention to the music. But I pick things from bands like Siddhartha, Coloncho, Carlos Sadness, and they all have kind of the same similar. They'll repeat things over and over, and it's been cool because I get students emailing me asking for the playlist. Because they noticed that the music was different than what they're used to hearing in their classes or what they thought music in Spanish was. It's not all mariachi. And so then I email them the playlist just directly from my Spotify list, and they continue to be exposed to the language at home.
And I'm glad she asked to pose that question, because I was thinking the same thing with the music. I was hoping it was more cultural and Spanish music to really help the students immerse.
Yes.
And we would love to know your playlist.
Yes, I can share the
I
playlist.
really, just not a question, but more a comment. I especially appreciated how the class hones in on the students' ability to improve their listening skills. All of us can benefit from that in every aspect of our life.
Yes.
So I love that. And secondly, great. I wish you all the best moving forward, because the immersion in the community, that community centeredness would be ideal. And then having an opportunity for the students to go into the community, welcome community members, and then that space after the class to actually continue that social engagement with community members.
Yes, absolutely. That's the hope.
I just want to, I'll just stop.
And have you ever tried it in like class, just like, because, you know, you're saying that the stress, you know, stress management, have you ever tried some of that, the chair yoga with your own students in class? And also as a hook for them to come and try it, because it can be like, you have to get the students there for them to see like, oh, this wasn't too bad. You know, I followed along by getting them there, because it's like, first person to come and try it, because it can be pretty scary. You know what I mean?
No, absolutely. I haven't ever focused on like, we're going to do a session, it's going to be a few minutes and working on that in the class. It's more like they get really stressed. I'm like, okay, we're going to set things down and we're going to